podcast for those who suffer, which is everyone.
It's a space where we can speak honestly about what it feels like to be in desolate places without losing hope.
Welcome to In the Thicket.
Hi, everybody. In this week's episode, we sit down with James and Dawn, a wonderful married couple, to talk about what it means to be in the marriage thicket. And specifically, we look at sex in marriage and some of the struggles, the challenges, the crosses that can come up in that aspect of a marital relationship. Obviously, this is a very sensitive topic, and so we just want to encourage you to be discerning about where you're at as you consider listening to this episode. But we found it so edifying and illuminating, even for me as a single person. There are so many universal aspects to the struggle of the call to lay your life down, to love others, to receive love from others, even when it is very challenging. So we just want to thank James and Dawn for being so generous and so courageous in sharing their particular journey with us. And we hope that you are blessed by this conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hello.
Good morning or afternoon or day, whatever you're listening. So we are super excited because we have a couple of very wonderful guests today. So we have James and Dawn Kautz here with us. They are kind of, Nicole and I know you guys from Winnipeg, from living in Winnipeg, and Rachel has just met you, but it's really fun. It's so fun always to see, familiar faces, especially people that you haven't seen for a long time. And it's just so nice. So welcome.
Thank you. I got to say, Erin, when I heard that when you invited us to come do this, and I realized Erin has a podcast, I'm like, I should start listening to it. And I realized it was on suffering. And I realized, did I cause this because I beat her in Boggle so much?
That is one of the
so I
origin
apologize.
stories of the podcast.
Like, honestly, still to this day, there's nobody but you that can rival me in Boggle. Like, we played it at Newman, and I was like wiping the floor. And I mean, I'm not claiming super intelligence or anything. I am claiming many hours of playing a Boggle game on my cell phone that honed my Boggle skills.
Oh my gosh, this is the most I've talked about Boggle in like a really long time.
Yeah, I feel like my brain is like retrieving like Boggle, this game, and I'm like, oh yeah.
It's so good. It's
games.
very
It is
fun.
so good.
So fun story with that. My family has this, like we call it Cousins Cup, where all of my extended cousins, we come together, we rent a cabin for the weekend, and we have like games. Everybody puts in, $20 or whatever, and whoever wins the most points from all the games,
That's awesome.
wins the cup. Very competitive, super fun. But also there may be beer involved in the mix, or it's just an opportunity. So we had Boggle as one of the games. And I like all my cousins wiped the floor with them. Totally. It was very satisfying.
Did you win the cup?
That was the only thing that I won the entire weekend.
Hey, no, but you won. Like that was like a decisive
It's true.
win. Yeah.
It's true. Although I have to say it was like the last game of the night. So it was like there were like like one or two beers had per person, and I was not drinking at all. So, maybe that was a bit of an advantage, but yeah, it could be. That's right. Exactly. Okay. So here is a fun question. So, to introduce all of our listeners to James and Dawn, one fun fact: they used to live in Winnipeg, and they now live in a rural town in Manitoba. And so this is a question for everybody. What do you prefer? What's your preference, rural or urban? What's better? We can start with you, James and Dawn, because you guys have the.
Well, I think by our choice of where we live, we've loudly proclaimed rural. I come from small town Saskatchewan, and so this is it's nice to kind of get back to that sort of roots and the small town, and just the community and people are friendly, and everyone, you see the same faces all the time. It's quite, and just the pace of life here is just slower. Even the whole pandemic stuff. I mean, people are still safe, but it's just not the kind of frenzy that you see in some of the cities.
Yeah. Okay. So we got one vote for rural for sure. What about you guys?
And me too. Like I grew up
Go on.
in Winnipeg and Ottawa, and I had my first experience with rural living was moving to St. Malo like 3 years ago, and I instantly fell in love with it. And I remember like driving through little towns to Saskatchewan to visit James's family and thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice to live in a cute little town like this? Kids can run to the park and like have friends on the street to play with and stuff. And yeah, it's great. It's amazing. Like we're a block from the community center, and the kids can play there summer, winter, fall, and spring, and you don't worry about them too much. And people are friendly. I've gotten to know tons of people on the block, and I love how quiet it is. And I don't know, you just feel like there's less judging eyes if your kids are playing in the yard by themselves and stuff like that.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I still remember even living in Regina when I was young. Like, it's like a city, and it was like, just go outside, do whatever. And then when the streetlights come on, you just go home. And it's, but yeah, not so anymore.
Not so much now. No.
Yeah, that's true.
And I always feel a sense now when I leave Winnipeg, this like sense of relief, like, oh, okay, just leaving it all behind. But that's been my experience.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so what about you guys? Nicole or Rachel, what do you think?
I mean, so I grew up in Winnipeg, and then I moved to Toronto, and I live in like the middle of downtown Toronto now.
Oh my.
So I'm like, have I ever lived in anywhere rural? I actually have. I lived in just outside of Waterloo, Ontario for like 9 months on an internship in like 2013, 2014. So that was like my only experience. But like, it's interesting because when I moved downtown Toronto, I loved it because it was like, oh, there's like all these things that I've always wanted to do, like swing dancing and I don't know, just like a lot of vibrancy in life and all this stuff. And I can walk anywhere. I don't even need a car. Like I can just get anywhere really fast and everything's close. And so I really liked that for the first little bit. But then I started to find it like kind of tiring. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's like too much to do. Like I could be out doing something every night of the week and there's no end in sight. And then it was funny because the pandemic hit and it was like, okay, all that shut down. And I was like, had this feeling of like, oh, thank goodness, So I'm not really sure where I don't have enough rural experience to know, but I think that like, I like the vibrancy of like city life, but probably not for many more years. So,
right.
I don't know. We'll see,
Okay. All right. How about you, Rachel?
I'm gonna be that person that like picks a choice that's not on the list, and I'm gonna go probably suburbs because I grew up in cities. I grew up in really big cities and in apartments and things like that, and I never liked it. Like even like I didn't know any different, but I never really liked living in an apartment, for example. Like I like living in a house and I like having trees around and stuff like that. I've never lived like totally rural. But I think why suburbs for me is because I do like a lot of people. And so I do like the idea of small town, everybody knowing each other, but I also like the idea of like meeting lots of new people, a lot of, just all the time and things like that. And so I like having access to the city, but not living in it. And I like having green, and then I like having a lot of people. So I feel like suburbs just fits that. So I think
okay. All right. So that's a good choice. Yeah. So she's going right out there, not even on the choice list.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I would have to say I kind of also am like like I would say small town, but like moderately small. So not small enough that Mrs. Potter from 2 doors down knows that at 9:08 Erin got out of bed, and at 9:12 Erin had a cup of coffee. 9:14 she walked to the mailbox. Like, like that small is a little small for me. But living in, because my dad was in the RCMP, so we moved like all over the place. And living in Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan, or like Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, like those were like, Yarmouth was a bit bigger, but those are pretty great because you could walk a lot of places. Like it's like one high school, so you know all the kind of kids there, but then there's still enough to do that Mrs. Potter can mind her own business, So that's like my preference.
Mrs. Potter.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I picked Mrs. Potter.
Classic Potter.
That's right. Anyway, so we'll post this on social media and see what the consensus of the listeners is, what's your preference, urban or rural? That's
Or
funny.
suburbs.
Or suburbs. Okay,
Option.
we could add.
You
add
can be
10
boring and be
options.
suburban.
Yeah. Sorry. We'll do like a scale. Like, what's your scale? You know, urban, rural. That'll be
It's a
good.
spectrum.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. Exactly. It's a spectrum of living preferences. That's right. Okay, good. So we wanted to start out by just asking you guys to share a little bit about you're married to each other. So how did that happen? What does your family look like now? Just a little bit about you for introduction.
Well, we met in 1997 on a group called the Challenge Team, which was an organization that toured Canada for 6 weeks every spring. And they would speak to high schools, youth groups about chastity, just from a common sense, sort of natural law, non-religious viewpoint whatsoever. And that perspective where you're just talking about the reasons why it makes sense just in your brain without opening up the Bible or anything like that, got us into a lot of schools that otherwise wouldn't have entertained that sort of message. And the whole purpose of the Challenge Team was just to give people a broader perspective on another choice, another way to live as sexual beings. And it was each year, I went on it in 95, Dawn went on it in 96, and then in 97 when we went together, we met. Each of those experiences was just so rich and full for us. At the end of that tour, 6 weeks or so, close quarters with each other. The two of us were on a team in Western Canada, and you get to know your teammates really well when you go through an intense experience like that, especially when it's one that covers a deep and intimate topic. We realized that we had a mutual attraction at the end of that tour. And unlike other organizations where you're not allowed to date for X amount of time after an encounter, they had no rules. So we're like, okay, we're dating now. And then Dawn wanted to go work for the Challenge Team in their office in Ottawa for a year, just to volunteer and be part of that, the culture of the team as they were setting up different tours. And she ended up organizing an Ireland tour in that time as well. At that point, I had nothing else going on in my life, and I had a serious girlfriend. I'm just going to follow where she goes. So I followed her, and that's where our romance really blossomed. Went through the crucible, and that's where we proposed, where I proposed, and she.
That was in
accepted.
Ottawa that
Yeah.
we were living
And then
together but separately. Like I was in a girl's household and James was in a guy's household. And
we were married by the venerable Father Bob Bedard on July 10th.
Oh, I didn't know that. Also, July 10th is my birthday, so
I
now
know that, yeah.
right? I totally forgot that we had the same thing. So that's it's exciting.
Also, in all of that, James was like Free Methodist at first, and then he converted to Catholicism. At the beginning of our relationship, there was things like that he would say, like, "Well, I could almost go out with Dawn, except for she's Catholic." So
Bit of a roadblock.
there was some heart conversion that had to happen first before a relationship happened, and
That's a story for another podcast.
yeah. But yeah, I think and now we've been married how many years?
22 this summer.
22 this summer. It's hard to
Wow.
keep track after a while. And we have 8 children, and we're expecting our 9th. And so we have
Congratulations.
a lot of
Congrats.
water has passed under the bridge.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And but yeah, it's like relating back to this topic that we're talking about, like I feel like we had a really unique start in our relationship because we were talking about sexuality to students, and we were really asked to be personal about like our own experiences as teammates, and like, why do you practice chastity? What has been your experience? Have you had a conversion of any sort, kind of thing? So stuff that wouldn't normally come up in a relationship, maybe for years, we were talking about within like weeks of meeting each other. And even like things about like, what's your position on contraception or child spacing or size of family, stuff like that. Like we were talking about that right away. So
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, and that's like, that was definitely when we were looking at kind of episode topics and things, was something that kind of really stood out for us in terms of the way we talk about sex, because there's such a beautiful, beautiful and rich and like full teaching on human sexuality in the Catholic Church, right? but sometimes it can be like it's so beautiful and it's so, good that sometimes it can kind of like, when you mash that up with the reality of sex in marriage, or taking into marriage like the things that you take in, like these dreams of how it will be, or even sometimes I think people in terms of like purity culture can then see sex as like either bad or something, like there's all kinds of things that can be like a difficult or painful transition when you go into marriage. And so because you guys have kind of spoken on this before, like you shared a lot, different talks and things like that about your experience of going into marriage and the different things that you came in with, and the pain of it, the growth of it, the joy of it, all those kind of things. Yeah, we were excited to really hear from you about this, to see. So obviously, this is definitely a personal topic. So we will let you set whatever boundaries you feel are appropriate in terms of talking about like a marital intimacy. But yeah, we can just start with that. Like even what your experience was kind of being chastity speakers and talking about those things, and then what it was like kind of going into marriage. And maybe where the ideals or the things that you were thinking about or hoping for or whatever, like what the reality was and what that was like.
The challenge team really like helped me grow as a person. And I think if I hadn't had that experience, I would have been like maybe afraid, like felt really like cautious, anxious about this all, like not really sure what I would know or feel, but like just being amongst these young people that were constantly talking about like sexuality being such a beautiful gift, and like how we want to treasure it and share it with someone special, and like looking forward to it. I don't know, that like helped me to mature and have a like less shy outlook about it, I guess. And like, and even definitely an openness that I think is super helpful and important in marriage, and probably not often there. Like I imagine that there's a lot of people that, okay, so in our culture, I don't know, like kids are having sex when they're like young teenagers. So I don't know if we're speaking to people that have had that experience, who've been sexually active from a young age, or else people who have practiced chastity or some other form of purity, saving themselves for marriage, whatever, and are living in that and looking forward to marriage. There's a whole like range of people there. But kids, like they watch movies of like you fall in love, you kiss on the first date, and then you like go to bed together and it's magical and everything works out perfectly. Whereas in reality, it's pretty awkward the first time. It's can be painful even, so like, where is that taught? I don't think that's taught, is it?
Not really. Everything is Disneyfied in terms of it just being simple and glorious and happily ever after. But that happily ever after becomes at the end of a Disney princess story. That's a full lifetime of learning to live with each other and learning to love selflessly, and to put up with, she puts the knives in the dishwasher upside down. There's so much more.
But there's so much more. Like, okay, so I feel like we sort of have to talk about stages of our relationship, because like at the beginning, like for people that are looking at just getting married, I don't know what's it going to be like. I was lucky to have a few good friends through that movement, the challenge team, that I was able to speak frankly with. And I was like living with a family, young married family with like one kid or whatever at that time. And I was like, okay, what's it like? Like, tell me about it, and she was able to be like frank with me, like what the experience of the first time is like, what can make it easier and stuff. And then one of our friends recommended this like tape that we listened to. It was Dr. Ed Wheat. It was like about your wedding night.
Describing the technical details.
Awesome. What's his name? Dr. Who?
Ed Wheat.
Ed Wheat. Okay.
We listened to this tape on the drive to our honeymoon location, and it was memorable.
That's so funny. Okay, I just want to go listen to that just for the giggle factor, I think.
So I feel like you kind of maybe need some mentorship of someone who's like, I don't know. I guess people just have sex and go into it blind too, and it works out. But
Yeah, that's true. I think that's really is a thing though. Like, even some friends of mine, I can think like as the wedding day is like coming, and then it's the realization of that you're gonna be like fully naked with another human being who you're not related to for the first time in your life, and like like what made it easier in your relationship beforehand for that to be like an awkwardness that was not insurmountable, or like maybe you know what I mean, like I don't know what that was like for you, but what helped in your relationship before?
I found that just as you grow closer as a dating couple and as an engaged couple and the wedding date approaches, we found that the physical desire grew. Um, and I mean that's a natural thing that happens in relationships specifically to help people procreate, and that's a good thing. But the when it came time for the wedding night, the it was there was minimal awkwardness. It was just this is we've been living up to this moment, preparing for this, like, and the wedding preparation that we went through with the parish was phenomenal. Just a great program, and like we I think we kind of overwhelmed the couple that was leading us through it with how deep and detailed we went. But it was great. It was almost like the program had been designed by looking at every single annulment in the history of time and finding the reasons and then creating a program based on those. Have you discussed this? Have you discussed this? So it was in depth, very very helpful. So it helped us even discussing things about sexuality and preferences, and understanding as well church teaching and Humanae Vitae properly, and everything that went into that. So like we, by the grace of God, we did it right. For those who come into it with more wounds than we did, and everyone has their wounds, there's always healing, and like God can work with anything if you give him permission. That's Father Bob's line, right? Give God permission.
That's right. Yeah.
So we surrendered our sexuality and our sex life as a married couple early on, like day one, and said, whatever you want, Lord, we will do. And he's like, here's 9 kids, and we're like, okay, one at a time, please.
Yeah.
Do you have any twins? Was it one at a time? Did he keep it to one at a time?
One at a time.
Unless this one's twins.
A
who
twin,
knows?
right.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my goodness, yeah. And it's interesting, even the like speaking about wounds, right? What was that experience like for you? Kind of the wounds that you each carried into marriage, and kind of having those come up against each other, or learning how to love each other in those things, because I think that is like a universal, I'm imagining, experience for marriage,
In this culture especially, it's so, I would say, nigh impossible to come into marriage without any sexual wounds, because the world certainly has a way of looking at sexuality. And I mean, I'll maybe shock everyone with this, but as a guy, I struggled with porn and masturbation. I'm sure, you know what, if there's a guy out there that hasn't struggled with that, I'd like to meet you, because I need to congratulate you. That's amazing. I think that's a near universal struggle. It really tainted my expectations. And it's not even something that, like, I'd say for the first 6 months of our marriage, it wasn't a struggle. And I was like, oh, I've been healed. Yay, real sex helped. But then, the stress of marriage, and the honeymoon phase wears off, and then you run into some conflicts. You start rubbing each other the wrong way. And I began to realize my body has been conditioned to need this emotional release that I've accustomed it to for a solid near decade before marriage, and that it's always a struggle. It has its ups and downs. Lately, I've experienced a lot of great healing from that, but I know it's never something that I'm going to be able to let my guard down on. And it's also something that in our openness with each other, I've needed to be very upfront and frank with Dawn about my struggle, and it hasn't been an easy thing for her to endure, or to hear, or to tolerate. but I believe she understands to a fair degree all the things that have gone into that.
Mm.
It's definitely tough for a wife to like wrap their minds around, like, oh, he's like looking at someone else, or like, and then what sort of feelings does that bring up in you? Do you feel inferior because of that? Or and like, even just, I don't know, you can swing from being like kind of, well, whatever, just go do your own thing, to like, no, how come you're not choosing me? And like, or even feeling like this is like adultery basically, because that's what Jesus said in the Bible, you know, like, and what sort of woundedness is that bringing into our relationship, and how do I bring forgiveness into that picture? I've found myself, like, I sort of struggle more with the emotional aspects of the like the particulars of that habit kind of thing, because I am a very social, extroverted person who craves community and craves connection. James is an introvert, but also in this struggle, like, he's turning to himself to soothe, comfort himself, and that's hurtful more than the physical aspect of what he's doing. Is just this like loneliness of like, no, I want the connection with you, like, or even like, if he were to spend a lot of time on electronics or reading or doing whatever, like on his own, like that sort of reignites that desire of like, no, I how come you're not choosing me, kind of thing. So which goes back to like the physical thing that's happening. So that's how it's been hard for me.
And there's been, I mean, she's been gracious in forgiving, and I know that's not an easy thing to just forgive, and we've needed a lot of prayer and counseling through that.
And counseling is so tough too. Like, we were going to someone that we thought was Catholic. Well, she said she was. And then when we brought up pornography and masturbation, she was like, well, which one of you has a problem with that? And I was like,
which one of you thinks it's wrong?
Which one of you thinks it's wrong? And I'm like, isn't this harmful for our marriage? Like, kind of as an absolute thing, you know? So.
Yeah. And I mean, the message up there, like, I've had doctors tell me, oh yeah, keep doing it, it's good for you. I'm like, no.
Yeah, it's true. And it strikes me too as like, when you're thinking about the attack on marriage, like the good of marriage, what it images, you know, like the relationship of Christ and the church, what it calls us to, like how it images the Trinity, the beauty that it conveys, and all of those things, then obviously, yeah, it's going to be like one of the prime attack places of the evil one in the world, right? Like, sure, if he can destroy the family, then he can destroy the world. And so in that attack on family, yeah, it also totally strikes me as like that porn has been such like had such a huge rise, I mean, with the digital age and all of those kind of things, but that it's like a struggle in, I would say, probably the vast majority of marriages, right? Like, I mean, Catholic, if you're actually struggling, like you're actually saying, yes, porn is bad and it's not good for people, then, you know, but especially because of the shame aspect, right? Like, especially because of the, yeah, like the evil one is just so good at like flipping, you know, and being like, look at this, you need this because you're hurt, or like whatever, and then immediately after of like flipping and being like, look what you did, like look what, or either way, like however that goes in marriage, you know, like that like wherever there's a temptation to hide ourselves from someone, and this is speaking to somebody who's married to Jesus, so like he knows everything, so I don't know what I'm talking about at all, but I feel that sometimes even with him, like the because I have shame about something, then it's like this temptation to want to hide myself, and I have to like actively speak into that lie and be like, no, this is not from you, you know?
Yeah.
Like, how does that work with you guys?
Sorry, I was just sort of thinking of something else on the tangent
while you're
talking. So
Go
I
with
know
yours.
I should have been actively listening better. But I was just thinking about girls too, and like women, like it's becoming more and more of a problem for women. And it's only become evident to me in that some of my teenage daughters have said, oh, I've struggled with masturbation, and like the ones you would least likely suspect. And then they're like, how come you didn't talk to me about this? And I was like, I didn't struggle with it, so I didn't think it would be an issue. I was, worried about it being a problem with the boys more than you, kind of thing. So I didn't say that, but yeah, it's just sort of a wake up call that it's important to be open to all of our children about this, and like from quite an early age, and yet not so early that you're giving them the idea. It's really tough to know when to talk about it. And I've it's interesting because we were chastity speakers and spoke so openly to kids of all, like teenagers or 12 and up, even some grade 5 and 6 kids. But now I find it's like an awkward thing to talk to my children about. So it's tough. I don't know.
Part of it's when you're in presentation mode, it's like the kids are gathered there for you to hear this talk. And if they don't go, they get marked absent, right? This is like, we have to create time with our children to to build relationship to the point where there is mutual trust and vulnerability, and then B, time to actually just have that discussion. One of the things that we do is like we have what we call daddy date days, where I take out one kid once a week and we just go for ice cream or something, and we don't even necessarily have an agenda. We're just with each other, right? I heard someone say that you can't create quality time without quantity of time. And so it just comes down to, you just invest in your kids, you create the relationship. And then when those odd moments come up when you're not expecting them, then you can have a teaching moment, and it might just be 30 seconds in the middle of a 2-hour conversation about something that sticks with them.
Speaking of kids and the struggle and the sort of pain and suffering that might bring to marriage, and like how that interferes with sexual relationships too, is like we use natural family planning. So despite the fact that it looks like we just have kids whenever, we actually have been spacing them out. Like we got married when I was 22, and now I'm 40, almost 44, and I probably could have had a baby every year and a half or so. So, but practicing natural family planning brings like challenges to marriage too, especially from like the female perspective, because literally the time of the month that you're most interested and wanting to have sex is the time that you have to abstain. So that's tough. And it's like tough to be like, okay, now we can do it. I don't really feel like it, but I better like put it out there because this is our window, and I don't know, like having lots of kids, being overwhelmed, being exhausted, being stressed out, like just being touched out by your kids. And you get to the end of the day, and I'll be like early in the day, oh yeah, we should do it tonight. I should like make an opportunity for that. It sounds, and as the day wanes on, I'm like, I don't know if I could do it. And by the end of the day, I'm like, I just want to sleep more than anything in the whole world, So.
And that's been difficult because, I mean, I'm wired differently because I'm male, and if she looks at me with that kind of out of the corner of her eye, it can be like, oh, I'm ready. But for her, it takes such a wind up, and so many things have to have gone well throughout the day. It's not like for me, it's an emotional release and a way to kind of put a positive cap on the end of my day. But for her, it's something that, if she's going to build up to this, her day has to go well. So we're kind of coming from opposite perspectives, and that's been part of the intimacy growth and learning to love each other and to make sacrifices. There are times when I know that she sacrifices for me, and there's times when I need to say, okay, it's just not going to happen, and that's okay. And it's the real difficulty there is not being bitter for me, not saying, again, she turned me down, blah, 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 I have a right to this, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
But recognizing that above all, she's a person. She's my wife, and our marriage is more than sex, despite what the society would tell us. It just has to be, because there comes a time in every marriage, whether it's just through the monthly abstinence through NFP or through illness or distance, there just comes a time when you just can't.
Or having a baby. Hey, did you know you can't have sex after you have a baby for a while? Like there's an actual, couple months that it's off the table kind of thing. So those are surprising things that come up. And then even after that time's up, like depending how often your baby's waking up at night and where your baby's sleeping, like some people have their babies in their beds with them. We don't, but I imagine that really puts a damper on their intimacy for the first year or two of their life. So there's many dynamics that would make it like super difficult for things to happen. And like, I don't know, our sort of like back and forth struggle thing is like, I will have this thing and I'll get anxious. I'll get like actual like anxiety as the end of the day approaches. Like, I can't, I don't think I can do it. And I just like, my stomach is in knots and I might start breathing deeply. And I'm just like, and I think lately, like my age has something to do with it. Like I probably have changing hormones. I started looking into it after talking to a few friends and saying like, I like don't ever want to have sex now. And it makes me super anxious and like, what's going on? And like, and so they suggested checking out hormones. So I went and saw a naturopath and I was dealing with that for a couple of months and then we got pregnant. So I guess we won't figure out that problem for now, but like literally your hormones can make you not want to have sex. And then how does that, like, no matter how nice and servant and loving things James does for me all day. And like, I could still be like, and then there's like your physical attractions might change throughout the years and like, or you might just be going through an emotionally stressful time and you're so worn down that it's just like something you can't wrap your head around. So then if I'm like rejecting James enough, like day after day or whatever, not times that he initiates or whatever, and then finally I'll be like, okay, I'm going to do this and I'll initiate. Sometimes he will at that point just be like so closed off because he's been rejected over and over again. And then it makes me feel like, oh, is he just like being mean back to me because trying to make me feel like how I've made him feel? And then it creates this huge fight. And then we're up to like 2 or 3 a.m. and they're like, crying in bed. And then I'm like, we have to do it because we have to get through this and not be mad at each other for a week or whatever.
I'm like, okay, fine.
But there was like literally a time, like this combination of like the hormones and the exhaustion and the stress that I started to feel like I would just be happier if we just didn't do it anymore. Like this is causing too much pain and stress. And when I mentioned that to James, that caused like huge pain to him because that's like the number one way that he felt loved. And yet, so I don't know what would have been the right thing to do. Like he was sort of like, you shouldn't say those things, it's just so hurtful. And I'm like, yes, but this is like this huge turmoil thing inside of me that like, this is how bad it feels that I would just rather go without for the rest of my life than deal with this drama that we go through, so.
Yeah.
And this is where the grace of the sacrament of marriage has just been so meaningful for us. To the profundity of the vows that we made, which are we try to recite them to each other fairly regularly.
Profundity.
Yeah.
What is that word? Oh, they're profound. Okay.
Yes, it means profoundness. Sorry.
Love it.
Like
See, boggle.
Words.
Boggle. Coming right back to it. Yeah.
But the vow that we made, good times and bad, sickness and health, love and honor, all the days of my life. It means something. Like Rush Limbaugh had a saying. He said, "Words mean things," which sounds silly, but it's kind of deep. Like when you say something that has power, and when we say those words in our vow, under the grace of the sacrament, with the blessing of the church, in a state of grace, like that means something. That creates something eternal and invisible that's tangible in our marriage, in our bodies, as Christopher West would say. And it's being able to rely on that grace and to know that through a hard time like that God is good, And this isn't the end of anything. This is just a continuation. It's part of the peak and valley experience of marriage, of life.
We went through a really rough spot in our marriage a few years ago. Like, when did we go in Cana? Was that 3 or 4 years ago?
About 3 years ago.
3 years ago, we went on this marriage retreat called Cana, which I'd highly recommend. And leading up to that point, we were just like, growing very distanced, growing cold to each other. And there was a lot of pain and hurt that was coming between the two of us. And in that, like James said, there's power in words, but even like in your thoughts, like I would have this temptation and this thought that I'd entertain, which was, I think I made a mistake. Like, God actually didn't want us to get married. And I would like entertain that. And on this retreat, I had mentioned that to a priest who had come to facilitate the retreat for us. And he like looked at me right dead in the eyes, and he's like, that's a lie from Satan, and you need to refute it every time it comes up. Like, just no, you cannot be thinking that. And he led me through like forgiving James, forgiving my parents, forgiving James's parents. Like, because even like my mom, she didn't want us, she was worried about us getting married too young, irresponsible, blah, 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 kind of fought against us getting married right up until the very point that we got married. And then afterwards, once we were married, I was like, oh, my mom was right about all these things about James. Like, all these thoughts, would pop in my head. And this priest said, have you forgiven your mom for putting those lies in your head? Like, you need to do that, right? So,
and her mom is great.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong, like,
she had the best of intentions, but I needed to forgive her for that lie that sort of came through her mouth without her knowing it, So anyways, in this retreat, and then we like also like had to, there was the first few days of the retreat were just like hell. Like, I was crying all the time. I was like, when will this be over? Get me out of here. And
it was pretty awful. It was a week-long thing.
It was a week-long, yeah. So you go with your
kids there.
You go with your whole family. They have programming for the kids, and then you have these really in-depth sessions where first you listen, and then you write to each other, and then you share the writings with each other, and then over and over and over again. And so I was like, okay, I feel like there should be a resurrection coming at the end of all this dying, but I don't know when it's going to come, and I don't know how much longer I can handle it. And then there was this one day where the theme was on forgiveness. And instead of like saying like, oh, you hurt me doing this, you need to forgive me for this, the question was, what do I need to forgive? What do I need to ask you for forgiveness for? So just kind of like flipped it around. And because we were both doing it at the same time, it gave us an opportunity to really like think about, how have I hurt my spouse, and what do I need to seek forgiveness for? And for the first time, I was able to apologize for things that had been hurting James. And the first time he felt free and safe to apologize for things too. And then that was like the pivotal moment of changing of everything. And then it was so amazing how like in our relationship, the change and how that reflected in our sexuality. Like, I went from like never wanting to have sex to like wanting to have sex many times in a day. Like, but it didn't always it doesn't always correspond that way. Like, sometimes you can feel deeply in love for each other and still the sexuality part isn't there, but a lot of times it really is a reflection of like what your other parts of your relationship are like. For sure.
Yeah, there's
and doesn't that make sense? Like, that like computes, it's like it shouldn't be news to us that that's true, but it's so somehow it is news to us, I think, in our culture, like, oh, that sex is actually connected to all the other parts of your relationship and the whole of how you love each other. It's like, but it is almost like a foreign concept, I think, because in our culture those two things have been so dissociated. Even for Catholics, I think, even in our minds, like, we think of sex more in an isolated context sometimes than in connected to everything else. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Can I ask a question then?
And it's very much a Puritan echo that has worked its way into.
Sorry, I think my Wi-Fi was doing something weird there. Why don't you say what you want to say, and then I'll ask the question after. We'll edit that.
There's definitely an echo of Puritanism that has worked its way through, I think, Western society, and the Catholic Church has kind of fallen into that. And this idea that sex is something, bad, maybe biologically necessary, but nothing certainly that's pure or that can draw us close to God even.
Yeah, like listening to Christopher West and like learning about the theology of the body has really like opened my eyes and like, oh wow, there's like so much more depth to it, and this is like giving us like the teeniest little foretaste of like what heaven will be like, kind of thing is pretty amazing. Anyways, Nicole, what did you want to say?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about, and I think this is kind of what you guys are already kind of getting at, but for young people thinking about, maybe who are not married yet but are desiring marriage, but also the reality of pornography that is, I think, in most relationships that's a struggle, and then so what you guys are talking about, just like kind of the ups and downs of marriage and the challenges. Or maybe even, young people who are recently married and are encountering all of this and are kind of like, what, because of our sort of the clash with the Disney-fied expectations or whatever. What is the hope, or what is the like, why do it? Why get married? Why bother? If there's all of this struggle, what would you say to someone who's sort of thinking about that? And I'm going to just be honest and be like, those are thoughts that come in my head sometimes, where I'm like, why would I put myself through marriage? Because it sounds tough, and there's fears there. And of course, and there's stuff that can, like you, Dawn, you're talking about like stuff that comes from parents or whatever it is, right? Like we've all got all of this stuff. And I just think that right now it's, that can be a really tough thing. So what would you say to that?
We have some friends here who got married quite young, like 18 and 20 or something like that. They were still in school, but they've had a very good marriage now. They've been probably 15 years or so. And, but they got a lot of flack from their families, from their friends, when they were getting married that young. And I went up to them and said, you guys, you're young, you got your whole lives ahead of you. You're in the middle of a bunch of stuff that isn't done yet. Like, I'll tell you right now, if you get married, it's going to be hard. It's going to be painful. There's going to be times when you wondered if you made the right choice. And I'll say, if you wait, 3, 4, 5 years and get married, then it's going to be hard, and it's going to be a struggle, and there's going to be times when you wondered if you made the right choice. So I think go for it now while you're young and you got the energy. Just picture it.
Yeah.
I would say too that, like, why do this? It's like, because Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. And how did he love us? He like went through torture and died for us. Like that's our reason of being on this earth. So if you look at the crucifixion scene, you're like, yeah, I guess I could handle marriage, like, but sometimes it feels like that. And you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't do this, but it's what we're put on this life for. Like, we're not here to just, have an easy, fun life. Like, no. And it's interesting. We were listening to Father Mike Schmidt's homily recently, and he was talking about like red martyrs and white martyrs, and how like red martyrs, they were like, it's obvious, like someone was like, are you a Christian? They're like, yeah, and then they get killed, like they get killed for their faith. White martyrs are people who just like die to self every day, little by little, and throughout your whole life, and that's how you achieve your martyrdom, and he was like listing off all these stories, like brave hero saints, whatever. And I'm like, I don't think I have that in me to be like that kind of like so brave that I would literally put my life on the line like that. And then I was like, but maybe I'd be brave enough to have another baby. And like just this idea of like, I guess I could be open to life one more time. And then shortly thereafter that I got pregnant. But what for me was a real fear. Like, I still have sort of traumatic memories of my last birth. And in the middle of that birth, saying to James with like pleading eyes, I don't think I can ever do this again. And now I'm going to be doing it again. But I'm also not being tortured and slaughtered for my faith. So, like kind of like puts in perspective, like, how are you going to lay your life down? How are you going to give your life for Jesus?
Which is such a good thing just to say and name, like, because it's this idea of suffering, right? Like, this is what we talk about all the time. Like, everybody suffers, everybody goes through significant suffering in their life. And it's not like salvation is not salvation without the cross. Like the Lord is there inviting us to, yeah, learn the good that can come from suffering when it's united with his suffering, and like, and how like it's how we get to the resurrection and all of those kind of things. But it's true, like I think we have a romanticized vision of a lot of things, like marriage, or I did for like consecrated life. That's still like we have to, and it's not until you kind of get into it that you like see actually like what the meat and potatoes of that suffering looks like. But I think also even like glimpses of what resurrection looks like in that too. So maybe that's like the last question we could ask you guys is like, what has that looked like for you? Like these little resurrections, like how have you kind of experienced that in your marriage?
Like I would say one resurrection would be that Cana retreat. And then we have like a honeymoon phase for like 6 months after that or something. And then, and even being pregnant now, yeah, like there's fear in that, but there's also joy in that. And
even all the hurt that we've caused each other and the forgiveness that we've extended and received, and the reconciliation there. It hits me every time that we go through one of those things. Yeah. That we're both struggling, we're both sinners, we suffer together, but not in a way that we can, like, our suffering doesn't coincide to the point where we're actually like leaning on each other. We're actually causing each other to suffer more through our suffering sometimes. But that's just where it comes back to the grace and the power of the sacrament, and knowing we're not the first people to suffer, not the first people to struggle in marriage, and that there's always hope and there's always healing. Like anytime that I encounter friends or neighbors that are going through struggles in their marriage and in the process of breaking up, I'm like, oh, you guys, I so wish that you could experience the healing that I have. And you might look at my marriage as someone whose marriage is falling apart and think, oh, I could never have what they have. But like, it has not been easy. We have had so many struggles, and it's so easy in today's world just to call it quits and move on to the next one. And that's a lie from hell, that's even a thing. Not that people who have taken that step are irredeemable by any means, but God's example of forgiveness to us, even looking at how he forgave the people of Israel through their centuries and millennia of idolatry. His covenant love is our model, is our example, and it involves being hurt. It's a requirement that we're going to be hurt, and learn to forgive and move on through that.
And even in raising children too, there's been so many peaks and valleys of like moments where you feel so proud of your children, and then there's other moments where you're like, there's years that are just like, this is hell, and will it ever go back to what it was supposed to be? Like, we've had a daughter who struggled with self-harm and suicidal thoughts and depression, and that was like a solid 2 years of really just tough times with her and journeying with her. We have another daughter who was like going through rebellious behavior, drinking and smoking and partying. And like, when you have like a really good Catholic homeschooling friend who's like, oh, I don't want your daughter hanging out with my daughter because she might be a bad influence on her. And you're like, ow, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I need your daughter to be a good friend to my daughter.
Totally.
Yeah. So yeah, there's been times with our children that things that they've done or that they've gone through that we never imagined or saw coming, that we're like, wow, how can we go through that? And then, but eventually you pull through. And I don't know, like there's couples out there that have been through like so much harder, and I hope and pray and plead God that we don't go through stuff like this. But there's kids that wander from their faith for years, or maybe they like transgender to something else, or you know, like just totally cut off communication with you. And like there's many ways that suffering comes through your children too. And so far we've had like redemption and resurrection after not too long of a period, although it feels like long when you go through it. But, and then yeah, in our marriage too, like the same things have happened where there's been like really amazing, joyful times. And then there's other times where you're just like, you want to give up. You wish that you, yeah.
Yeah.
I so appreciate, like, I've just been like listening and absorbing, and I'm not married, not dating right now, like any, like that's not even in like my immediate future, but I just feel like for me, the reality of what it takes to be in communion with people is such a universal reality, obviously very uniquely lived out in marriage. But you know, I feel like some of the things that you're saying, it's just, that's just what it means to be a disciple. It's what it means to follow the Lord and to love, like, and you've said that so much in what you've talked about. And I think that, like, that's where, you know, like Nicole, you asked the question, like, why, you know, why do it? But I think it's, yeah, suffering is universal. Like the peaks and valleys of life always have to do, I think, with how we are able to receive love and give love, and the barriers that are there and the wounds that are there that we experience in whatever our primary relationships are that God calls us to. And that is always painful because we are sinful and broken and wounded. And like the process of becoming healed, the process of like really the white martyrdom of like, okay, when I hopefully die and close my eyes, I step into heaven, that whole peeling away of all the things that don't belong in heaven and all the things that are keeping me from the love of God is really what you've been speaking about. And I think for me, I sometimes feel like, you know, it's so cool because you guys are chastity speakers and that's kind of what you've done in your life and what one of the things that you've done in your life. And sometimes I feel like that group of speaking is curated to very specific kinds of messages, which makes sense, but we don't really hear just real, you know, stuff. And it's not even about how hard marriage is. It's just like, oh, you're just sharing your walk as disciples and like how God has been pulling you more and more to himself and to each other. And the reality of that, that's just, it's just real, you know? And I think we need to have, I'm so grateful for this conversation because I think we need more conversations like that of just the mentorship of other disciples who have learned how to love because the Lord has shown you, because your life, you know, has happened and it's like real. And it's not like it's not about like, well, if you're, you know, because for me, like we're all on this podcast, like I'm in my 30s, we're all like women who have lived in different ways and we're not really looking. And I think there's a whole group of young adults who aren't necessarily looking for, you know, the chastity talk anymore because we've heard it and we know it and we're good with that. But we're kind of looking for like, what is how do you live this, whatever this is, if you're single or you're married, or like, how do you live this like hard thing of like following Jesus and loving others and healing and all of that. And I think married couples have so much to share about that we don't really hear that often. So I'm just super pumped. So thank you for just sharing everything.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. It actually makes me just thank you. Just thank you for sharing so openly, because I do think that there's something that resonates in us with, you know, when Pope Benedict said, we're not creative, we're not made for comfort, we were made for greatness. There's something that resonates, and there has, like, hearing the challenge of marriage, like the real challenge of marriage and loving and dying to yourself every day. Like there's something in that even we're drawn to at the same time as it being so like difficult, you know, and even hearing like about the grace and about the reliance on the vows and the things like that, like that's that it's possible, you know, that it's possible, but also that it's the, like, even in the hardness of all of the nitty gritty stuff, that it's like saint making, you know, like there's part of us that desires sainthood as much as we desire to run from suffering, but it's like, you know, so to hear, thank you for sharing anyways. Thank you so much.
And we've only covered just one aspect of the difficulties in marriage and just on the sexuality side, which is big, but there's also, there's the realities of cohabitation, child raising, finances. There's just, and like how to manage your friendships outside. There's a lot else. Marriage is saint maker.
We'll just have a whole series, you know, we'll just do like series with Don and James Kautz. Good. We'll do like Lent. It'll be great. We'll talk about all that. Oh my goodness.
Today in episode 83, we're going to talk about sewing machines.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be vacuuming.
Oh no, that's episode 84.
That's right. Oh, good. Okay. This
We
is
didn't
good. Okay.
really get into the knives and the dishwasher thing. So we also
Oh yeah.
That's right. That's got to be an
another
episode.
That's
too,
actually
yeah.
kind of raw.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
really
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Man.
All right. Well, on that note, let's move into God winks. So I have a God wink this week, and then we'll open it up to you, James. Now, you don't have to share one, but you're welcome to share
good.
one if you want. Okay,
I'm good.
sweet. So for me, my God wink this week is I ordered this bathing suit. I found this company called Modli, Modli, and it's from New York, and they do like modest swimsuits and stuff, and they're really beautiful. Anyway, so I ordered this swimsuit because I've been like swimming whatever at the pools in the summer, and I was like super pumped to get the swimsuit. I've been like tracking it. It hasn't been coming or whatever. And then on the one day where I was like, Lord, like I mean, maybe I shouldn't be swimming now because, I'm paying a fee every time. And like, there's one medication that I take makes me sensitive to the sun and da 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 da. And it was like at that moment, the doorbell rang and it was the delivery of this swimsuit. And I was like, and it wasn't even supposed to come for another 2 days. So I was like, all right, good. I gotcha. Got the message.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Go swimming. Yeah, that's right. Worry not. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So how about you guys? What's your God wink? Oh, did you say yes, God wink or no God wink?
I've got one.
Oh, you got one. Yeah, go for it. Mm-hmm.
So I've been running for the last couple of months, which has been a new adventure for me. And there's this little route that I take through town. I have to kind of lap around a few blocks and up and down a little path, and I can get 5K in. It's a small town, and it's quite a nice route. The other day I was going along the gravel path, and all of a sudden out of nowhere there was just like this cluster, like probably 8-10 feet long on the side of the road, of just these tiny little white flowers that had just appeared out of nowhere since the last time that I had gone. And it was, I don't know, I don't want to be that cheesy nature hippie. It's like, Jesus is in nature, man. But I really felt like God had put those there to bless me on this new initiative that I'm doing for my physical health. It was just a good moment of recognizing beauty.
That's
the beauty.
beautiful.
That's beautiful.
Love that. Yeah. See, this is good. Both of ours have to do with like exercise initiatives. So maybe this is right now. It's a meta God wink.
It's a meta
for
God
somebody
wink.
who's listening right now, and they're like, "Well, is this good? Should I do?" Maybe God is answering you. I don't know.
Do
Anyways,
it. He's saying, do it. Do it.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for the episode this week, James and Dawn. It's been like really awesome to have you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been a real honor. So nice to see you guys.
You too.
Nice to see you as well.
God bless you, all the
God bless
people
you.
listening, and we'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Thicket. If you like what you hear, give us a rating and hit that subscribe button. We have new episodes every Monday with more stories and honest conversations about life when the going gets rough, and the hope and humor amidst it all. We'd love for you to join our community on Instagram and Facebook at In the Thicket Podcast. While you're there, let us know how we can pray for you. God bless, and see you next week.